All right, so eNCA specialist reporter Karyn Maughan covering the Oscar Pistorius trial from start to finish, and let's get her views on this. And Karyn, when we say start to finish, it was a good few years ago that this had all played out in Pretoria, and now we were back in court today. What do you think, or what do you know, was the reasoning behind the NPA wanting to bring this up again now? What has changed since last time we were in court?
Well, this is a very different appeal. Remember when the state first appealed, it was on the issue of Oscar Pistorius' culpable homicide conviction. And they felt quite strongly, and the eNCA Supreme Court of Appeal upheld this, that the judge had misconstrued the law around dolus eventualis. Most pertinently, she had said the fact that Oscar Pistorius had not foreseen that it was Reeva Steenkamp behind his toilet door when he fired those 4 shots, means he couldn't have been convicted of dolus eventualis. And the state argued successfully that that was not the test, that in fact it's a human being behind the door, and that you can reasonably foresee and reconcile yourself with the fact that if you take action that can result in the death of a human being might die. And that was essentially the very specific legal technical point that the state took and argued successfully with the SCA. Of course, the SCA maintaining the factual findings of Judge Thokozile Masipa that Oscar Pistorius had acted in the belief that Reeva Steenkamp was an intruder, but finding that he hadn't provided a rational explanation for his behavior. Now, Karyn took that point as really the basis of one of his main strains of argument in these so-called 6 misapplications that he was arguing today. And he said, you know, essentially Judge Thokozile Masipa saying that, look, Pistorius did believe this was an intruder, and that should be a mitigating factor. He was acting out of fear. He wasn't acting out of murderous intent. The state said that's a clear misdirection, and the life of an intruder is just as important. Well, you can't just, write off the life of a so-called intruder, because of course that has implications. And they made a number of arguments about misdirections of the judge, but ultimately, it took her 3 minutes to read out those 3 lines, and she's essentially said, no way, no how. Well,
clearly the NPA feel that the judgment they got all that time ago is not right. They came back on the finding of culpable homicide and now on the sentence. They clearly believe that there is an argument to be had. How much further can they actually take this? They went back to the judge that they appeared before multiple times. What now can the NPA do if they choose to do anything?
Well, they can petition the Supreme Court of Appeal, but it's a far more difficult issue with sentencing. And the defense is saying, look, effectively this guy got an 8-year sentence because he's already served a year. He was out on correctional supervision. That amounts to another year. Karyn, of course, disputing this. But this is an effective 8-year sentence. And within the context of South Africa and murder sentences, it's really not shockingly lenient. And he's right. I mean, we saw the B.S. Rue case, which obviously was a culpable homicide matter in which he was convicted of negligently beating a traffic officer to death, and he got a suspended sentence. We've seen scenarios in which people have not got, 8 years is not considered a shockingly inappropriate sentence for murder. That being said, the state saying that this was dolus eventualis bordering on dolus directus, and their big argument in terms of that was saying this was 4 shots. It wasn't 1.
Do we know when this petition to the SCA might come through? Is there a legal procedure they have to follow within a number of days or a number of weeks?
Well, effectively it's 21 court days, so it's 3 weeks essentially, or more than 3 weeks. But so they do have a bit of time. If they feel, they can ask for condonation further down the line to bring this application, but it's quite difficult on the issue of sentence.
Let's take a look at the court itself. We were just seeing at the bottom of the screen, viewers would have noticed Oscar Pistorius obviously not in court today. We know that even before he or she Oscar would have arrived or not, there was no massive media contingent outside. Anybody of the family inside get a chance to speak to anybody?
No, I mean, I think Reeva Steenkamp's family have just said that they support the state's efforts, but they're not pushing a particular agenda in terms of either the culpable homicide conviction. And the only time they've really articulated an opinion was around that issue of him being released after 10 months and just saying to the parole board, we really don't feel that that's adequate to compensate for the death of Reva. But they have sort of tried to take themselves out of this process. They just say, you know, we believe the state has the right to do what it needs to do, but we just don't want to be massively involved in this.
Karyn Maughan, thank you very much indeed. The book on Oscar Pistorius not closed as yet. What's the next chapter? Of course, as we heard from Karyn, roughly 21 days, roughly 3 weeks for some kind of action to be taken, although it's not quite written in stone. As such, Karyn will continue tracking that for us. You can follow her on Twitter as she unpacks this and stays on top of things. It's at Karyn Maughan on Twitter.